All right. So we talked about fire. We talked about the golf course. So let's talk about where this money comes from for all this stuff, the city finances.
All right.
Now,
I've been fortunate. We have an excellent director of finance, Megan, and she's got an open door policy, which I have taken advantage of.
Oh, great.
And she has been very patient. She's explained to me thoroughly the golf course finances. You know, it's not 800,000, it's between 500 and 560. So with that, I ask an important question. Our city has a reserve fund, a reserve fund. How much money is in the City of Benson Reserve Fund? It's just under $20 million. That's a lot of money for a city of 5,600 people. So I did some research. Sierra Vista recently had a reserve fund around 10 million. So why do we have this? So when the discussion of the new fire station on 90 came up, there was talk about bonds and things like that. Well, bonds, you're borrowing money. Nobody's just giving you free money. You're paying interest on it. So I argued, what about the reserve fund? And our city has been very careful with that reserve fund ever since the layoffs occurred a decade or so ago. They're being very careful, which is wise. But when you have a need and you have money for that need that's not wiping out your reserve fund, a fire station could be built for $6 million or under with one apparatus.
yeah, which is less than half.
So there is money. Our city does have money. You know, I look at my property tax statement and I see for City of Benson, it's well under $300 a year. Guess how much I pay Cochise College? $660 a year. How did that happen? It was the second most expensive thing on my property tax bill, Cochise College. So, you know, how did Cochise College manage to keep getting more and more money for their building fund? I've called them about it. And, you know, I'm a journalist. I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and ask questions. And they're like, why are we paying this much and when does it stop? I couldn't get an answer when it stops. My city that's providing police, fire, streets is getting half, less than half of what Cochise College is getting. You know, we have an incredibly low property tax. And it's argued, you know, well, we need to have that because we don't want to put homeowners in financial bad shape. But then we keep raising our sales tax.
Yeah.
What happens next month with our sales tax?
So the argument always is that, you know, the tax on property just puts too much burden on the property owner, right? A distribution, you know, of these funds that seems unfair. We're not broke. The city's not broke. And as you've said, you talked to Megan, and I listen to her at every meeting, and I try to keep up with the numbers. And there are situations where you know, we're in a, you know, desperate situation for money. Basically, a lot of it has to do with where stuff is allocated. Mm-hmm. And so I want to know why, you know, why it is that we can't convince people, you know, to take on the burden. Nobody likes taxes. I hate them. I don't want to hear about them. But there has to be a revenue source. There just has to be. But where is it?
You know, our legislature right now is discussing no tax on food. If that happens in Benson, it's going to cripple our city because we are so dependent on sales tax. And of course, that's Walmart and Safeway, the two big sales tax producers for our city. So you're right. We have to figure out a way to diversify. We can't, I mentioned a minute ago, in a month, our sales tax will go up 0.5 cent because we voted for the new jail, which I agree probably is very needed. But our sales tax in Benson is getting really high. And I have neighbors that go over to Vail once every couple of weeks because they can go to the Safeway or Walmart over that direction, and they're not paying sales tax on food. So we have to figure this out. And that's something the council has to sit down and you know, get a handle on.
So that'll be a good issue to campaign on. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what happened on the election. First of all, let me bring up aluminum dynamics, ADI, aluminum dynamics. Their approach to the city was ended up being very divisive. Not only was it their particular approach, but also I think the behavior of the council, or at least citizens, I think, interpreted the behavior of the council, as just unsettling, just because of their just lack of I think, information or.
How about this? Candidacy. They weren't candid about it.
So tell me a little bit about it. You're a constituent, as am I. How did you see that?
All right. When I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and when the city council interviewed me to put me on the board, I brought up our city has to communicate. They have to. I spent 40 years in the communication industry. You're in the communication industry. We know the importance of getting the word out there. What I would have recommended way back when, I would have recommended that since Benson's staff, this isn't something they normally do, public relations, that the city would have been very wise to invest in a public relations firm that would have given them good advice. These are the steps if you want this to happen. Because, I have friends that are very much against ADI, and that's their number one complaint, that they just wanted information and they felt burned, always hearing things after the fact. Things had moved ahead and they're hearing way back here. So we have to communicate to our constituents that every industry wants it to be a surprise when they suddenly show up in town. That way they don't have to do the fight. But that's not necessarily good for the city and for the city government to go along with, well, let's keep this on the down low.
I want to say this, that that's never happening again. The culture has completely changed, and the way we source information has completely changed. And so it's going to be very difficult for any large company to sneak into any town anymore. That's just because our ability to communicate with each other has completely changed. And so you're right. This is what happened is basically they were fairly timid about explaining to people what this was what was happening. And look, if this had been a donut shop coming into town, you don't even have to mention it. But I think looking at the scale of this project should have told the council something. Should have at least said, "Hey, wow, look at the scale of this thing." Just that alone should have been. That's reason enough to treat the situation differently to me.
There's no doubt.
Yeah,
Candidacy pays off. Just talk to your constituents. Let people know what's going on.
Okay.
And if you end up not getting the company, well, maybe it wasn't meant to be. But let me include, before we move on beyond ADI, we just had 70 youngsters graduate from Benson High School, another 40 down at St. David. We need jobs here. We need jobs. Unless they want a minimum wage job, the odds are they're going to have to leave town. So we in Benson are paying for their education, St. David paying for education, and our investment is disappearing on us. And we need to attract companies. So what companies do you want? And I think that is one of the challenges with the current council is, maybe they opened up the door that a lot of people didn't want. We're such an excellent location at 90 and I-10, the railroad that we have here. Why don't we have more distribution? That's clean industry.
Absolutely. So
and those are good paying jobs.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So let's drop ADI because in reality, we have a ton of issues to face that don't have anything to do with that, and they're just as important. But zoning. So ADI look, I'm not going to blame them for trying. That location was actually perfect for them. As you say, the highway, the railroad spur that was already there, and then of course a town close by for all kinds of supplies and stuff like that, and also some people to work. And so, hey, that's not too bad. That's why we have industrial zoning in town, though, that to attract industrial businesses.
I think we need to look at our current zoning. Hasn't been changed for a long time. And, if you look at it, the big Highway 90 subdivision that was dreamed of, planned, is still very much apparent in our zoning, and nothing's happening up there. I live up there. There are no fresh stakes in the ground or anything. That is pretty much what it is what it is. So I think we need to look at our zoning. One thing I'm really pushing is the Highway 90 extension towards the airport.
Yeah,
I've talked to.
I've always thought that was a great idea.
I've talked to Lupe Diaz about what can the state do. He's been very supportive. We can do this. You look at the property owner of that stretch of desert. Right now, he has a certain value to that property. If a highway goes right through the middle of it, that property value is going to explode. That's where we would get distribution centers, trucking companies, and things like that. That, in my experience, I did a lot of flying in Florida, that small town airports and industrial zones are a marriage made in heaven. They just work.
Exactly. We could move a lot of the industrial areas towards that and start moving them a little bit away from the areas of concern. Because what's happened, this ADI situation has basically opened everyone's eyes as to where all of these industrial zones are around town. And now everyone's noticing that, hey, we have a bunch of industrial zones around town, and I'm not sure I want industrial businesses there, right?
I'm pretty sure you were at the planning and zoning meeting when the Ocotillo Road, where they were trying to take it from, a group was trying to go from light industrial to get heavy industrial. Right. And I take my responsibility of being on planning and zoning serious, so I went down and talked to the hotel owner that was right up above it, butted the Quality Inn Hotel. Yeah. And fortunately, he was in town. He's an Easterner.